Hey there, friends. If you are looking to solve a problem, wouldn't the first step be to notify the actual issue and drill it down to the actual root cause and then say, how do we go from here? If a person isn't really looking for the true cause, yet they say they're trying to solve something, are they really serious about solving it? First, guys, go check out my friends over at cmmg.com. These guys walk the walk. They don't just talk the talk whenever it comes to any kind of Second Amendment support. These guys are very active in the community as far as putting their money where their mouth is. Not only that, they make great firearms too. You can get your selection of calibers, Cerakote finishes, different types of action. One of the cool things about it is you also have a feature where you don't have to pay full price now. You can pay in payment plans. This is a pretty cool feature. Allows you to save a little bit of money now, keep some money in your pocket, and pay over the course of time. I recommend taking a look at this if it's something that fits your needs. Go to cmmg.com, use my discount code FTATF. Again, my discount code is FTATF. Receive 10% off your purchase at cmmg.com. Newsflash, guys, we had 34 mass shootings in the month of January. What, you don't remember hearing about 34 mass shootings? Wait, but I mean, everybody knows we've had 34 mass shootings. I mean, are you not looking at the data that everybody else is looking at, that everybody else refers to? As a result of all those mass shootings, we have created a society of scared people. 1/3 of U.S. adults say fear of mass shootings prevents them from going to certain places or events. Nearly 1 in 3 adults, 32%, feel they cannot go anywhere without worrying about being a victim of a mass shooting. 33% say fear prevents them from going to certain places or events. You know, if this were for all the right reasons and using the correct data, I would say, good for you, right? I mean, honestly, don't those of us who don't want to be shot or don't want to be involved in some kind of rampage shooting or something like that just avoid places? You know what else I avoid? I avoid going to inner cities at 2 a.m. in the morning because I'm likely to get shot there. This all comes from the American Psychological Association. Also, stress of mass shootings causing cascade of collective traumas. So first, let's take a really quick look at mass shootings, as they call them. And I'm not going to be able to do the quotes every single time because I am using their terminology in this video. So I'm just not going to do that every single time. Sometimes it's just a habit, but I just want you to know that if I don't do that, it doesn't mean that I'm accepting of their term. This is a term they are using. I am going to use this so I don't confuse people as to what we're truly talking about. I will actually talk about the true actual definition of that, or at least break down that term here in a second. According to Every Town for Crazy Moms, they say we now define a mass shooting as any incident in which 4 or more people are shot and wounded or killed, excluding the shooter. Now, I find this a little bit unusual because usually when you look at numbers and you want to all be on the same page, you would use official numbers, right? Like maybe the FBI data. FBI actually looks at murders. They don't look at just people shot. So this is a much wider net that we're casting, and for obvious reasons. It gets more attention and it's more sensational. They go on to say, in this report, every town adopts a definition informed by the common understanding of mass shootings, increasingly accepted by most U.S. residents and chosen by many major news outlets and the Gun Violence Archive, the source of much of the data in this report. So they're saying that most of the data that they've included in their report comes from the Gun Violence Archive, and they're also saying that the Gun Violence Archive, which it is chosen by many and in fact most of the major news outlets. This we know. They go on to state that since 2015, over 19,000 people have been shot and wounded or killed in a mass shooting. In 2022 alone, over 600 people were killed with over 2,700 wounded. Did you know that 600 people were killed in mass shootings in 2022? I didn't either. But maybe my definition of mass shootings is different. Why do these people use a muddied up term like mass shootings, knowing that all the garbage that goes into it is not what they're really looking for? What I mean by that is, when the term mass shooting is used, it's used to stoke fear. It's used because when we initially think of a mass shooting, we're thinking of what we would consider a true mass shooting. In other words, we're sitting in church, somebody walks in the back door and just starts indiscriminately shooting at people. Very unpredictable, very random. The people are not necessarily targeted. It's just this person is trying to commit an act of an atrocity, a tragedy, so to speak, and take as many lives as possible, again, indiscriminately. So who all uses the gun violence archive? Guys, I went across the internet and there is very little of any place that you can go and not find somebody referencing the gun violence archive. It's listed throughout the internet from one end of it to the other, and it looks like it is actually the, let's just call it the standard that everybody is relying upon to say that, hey, we got a problem. You know, we got a problem out here. It's mass shootings, and thanks to the gun violence archive, we have this all figured out, and we have one source where all this data is being collected that we can rely on because, hey, it's got to be good data, right? Because it's on the internet. In fact, regarding the gun violence archive, the Second Amendment Foundation wrote that the media, elected officials, and what he calls the gun violence prevention community, or GVP, are using his statistics is not in question. The Biden administration has cited Bryant's data, as have a bevy of other officials and political candidates at the local, state, and federal level. Now, who is Bryant? Bryant is Mark Bryant. Mark Bryant is the executive director of the Gun Violence Archive. Mark is pretty much the brains behind the organization regarding the Gun Violence Archive. He compiles all the data along with some other people that work for him, and there in turn people use his data to report on it. Now, Mark was asked one time, why are the Gun Violence Archive mass shooting numbers higher than some other sources? And I'm sorry for the text being so small here, guys. This is the best I could do on this. GVA uses a purely statistical threshold to define mass shootings based only on the numeric value of 4 or more shot or killed, not including the shooter. GVA does not parse the definition to remove any subcategory of shooting. To that end, we don't exclude, set apart, caveat, or differentiate victims based upon the circumstances in which they were shot. GVA believes that equal importance is given to the counting of those injured as well as killed in a mass shooting incident. That's pretty much providing cover for their numbers being inaccurate. And what I mean is they know that they are muddying the water with things that don't normally get looked at as a mass shooting. Again, the phrase mass shooting is used on purpose because it stokes fear. When you hear that, you're not thinking of Rodney and Gary shooting at each other at the tennis courts at 2 a.m. in the morning. You're not thinking of Mr. Brown killing his entire family in the house because he's crazy. That's not what you're thinking of, because those are not direct threats to normal people, people who would be going about their business under normal circumstances. But that phrase is used because you can mathematically, according to Mr. Bryant here, include all these other subcategories that make the real phrase that we are definitely fearful of sound a whole lot worse than what it really is. Now, Mr. Bryant was asked about this, about the numbers not necessarily being accurate. Bryant deflected blame for the media's overhyping and misuse of his data, basically threw the media under the bus, stating, if the numbers are misleading, the journalists didn't do their homework. You could make that argument, he said. The media zeroes in on it, not us. At one point, we wanted to take mass shootings out of the loop, but the phone started ringing on a daily basis. It's important to me that we're not misrepresented. So Mr. Bryant realized that throwing all of these numbers in on mass shootings was inaccurate. But the media liked it because there was inflated numbers that they could definitely run on. They could sell ads, sell newspapers, sell commercials. They could make money off of that because the numbers were so inflated. When he removed those numbers because he realized they were not accurate, they complained. They don't care that the numbers were inaccurate. They care that the numbers were out there. And they complained to him, and he put them back up, knowing they were inaccurate. So you can sit here and blame the media all you want. Mr. Bryant knows these numbers are inaccurate. And by him trying to take the, quote, high road by saying that he's not going to create subcategories because all the numbers are important is a way to muddy up the water. He should create subcategories. Since he didn't, I took the liberty of doing that myself so that we can look at the real numbers and identify what the real problems are. So I took the liberty of breaking these down into 3 categories. These are the types of, quote, mass shootings. Again, I am using their phrase of mass shootings because that is commonly referred to in most media outlets. Rampage shooting. That is the one that we truly worry about. And there's a couple of reasons why we worry about that. We worry about that because of the unpredictable nature of a rampage killing. Rampage killings are when a sociopath takes the lives indiscriminately of other people. It's very random. It usually happens in gun-free zones. It usually happens in places that are super public, like a mall, a church, a school, just places where they know there will be a lot of people because ultimately they're looking for a high body count. They don't care who they kill. They just want numbers. Again, it's not random. The targets are almost always not known. Even though these people are mad at people, they usually don't have a specific person that they're mad at. And they usually take place, obviously, in that popular public place. Domestic killings are the next type of killings. These are also lumped into this category of mass shootings. They are not random. The targets are known. They specifically shoot the members of their own family or their spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, whichever. And they usually take place in the home or thereabout, in one of the homes of either the victim or the actual person, the suspect doing the shooting. The last category, subcategory of, quote, mass shootings is the confrontation shootings. This is the massive number. This is where the numbers really come from. These are the numbers that get people's attention because they're so inflated. They are not random. The targets are known. They are usually sections of people who don't get along. I don't want to necessarily use the word gangs because these people pretend to be gangs, but they're really not official gangs. They're just groups of people, and they have beefs with one another, and they shoot at each other. They usually take place at homes, streets, and parks late at night. So these 3 types of killings are very, very different. The confrontation killing is one that the vast majority of Americans, they're not scared of it. You are not in a gang, right? I'm not in a gang. Let's just apply this to me. I'm not in a gang. I don't have a group of people other than the anti-gun people out there who, as a group, are looking for me and don't like me, right? And I don't think they're the kind of people who will hunt me down and shoot me randomly in my front yard. So I'm not a threat because I am not one of the opposing factions of people who are slinging dope or doing other things on the street. They usually take place at homes, streets, and parks late at night. I am not in those people's homes. I'm not on their streets. I'm not in their parks. And I'm darn sure not there late at night. So a confrontation shooting does not scare me. And most people in America could give 2 rips about a confrontation shooting because they know it will never affect their family. Now, maybe their kids get involved with the wrong group and suddenly those people do get sucked into that confrontation type shooting. Maybe their kids go to a party, a block party. Maybe they go to a house party or something like that. That's where you usually see those opposing groups of people that wind up there. So younger people are usually more susceptible to a confrontation type shooting, even if they're not gangsters or bad people. They get caught up in that because it's wrong place at the wrong time, right? But as far as the average everyday American who gets up, goes to work, works a 9 to 5, does everything that most people are doing, they're not usually going to see themselves at a house party or a block party at 2 a.m. in the morning where opposing factions are shooting at each other. So that's not a big fear to people. The domestic shooting, you know what, that should be kind of a fear for everybody, but obviously not every family is going to be susceptible to a domestic shooting. Usually it's somebody, obviously, drugs, alcohol, marital issues, dating type issues. There's so many things, mental health. All that can play into triggering a domestic violence issue. Those are actually very rare. They're almost as rare as rampage shootings. So again, a large portion of America is not going to be susceptible to a domestic type killing. Now, which one stokes fear and strikes fear in the hearts of Americans. The rampage killing. The reason why is because they are random. The targets are not known, and they don't really care who the targets are. They will shoot you just because you are there at that public place in a popular public area, town square, again, church, school, mall. It doesn't matter. These people are targeting these high places of traffic for the very reason of specifically getting a higher body count. That's what scares Americans, because you cannot predict it. These other two, although the domestics are not really predictable, because the numbers are so low, it's not a high threat. The other numbers of the confrontation are predictable. The geography is predictable, and the type of people are usually predictable. You know, that's not my crew. That's not who I hang out with. So I'm not in fear of being shot by somebody driving by. It's just not a thing. But the fact that they don't get enough tension with the rarity of the rampage shooting, which is the one almost everybody fears. I think everybody fears that random indiscriminate shooting that just pops off in a place that you would not expect it. Again, very important geography here. You're not going to expect in these places. That's what people are fearing. And because those numbers are not high enough, the Gun Violence Archive throws all these numbers in there and it dramatically inflates it. And again, more specifically, those confrontation shootings are what really gets people's attention, because they're not telling you that it's a, quote, gang-related shooting or something like that. They're telling you it's a mass shooting because of strictly the numbers. 4 or more people shot. So boom, we can dump it into this category, and that gets people's attention, and that scares them because they don't know and don't take the time to read the specifics of what's involved in these types of shootings. So they simply look at the overall message and say, oh my God, in this case, according to the Gun Violence Archive, there were 34, quote, mass shootings just last month, in the first month of 2024 in January. Let's take a look at those, all right? I took the liberty of looking at every single one. I took their database, downloaded it in my computer, and I took the liberty of going into it and resubmitting what each one of these things were. If you see in the far left-hand column, I have accidental, rampage, domestic, or confrontation. Now, accidental, I just put in there because there happened to be one accidental shooting in another database that I'm going to show you in a couple of days. So I made sure to include that. But look, in a shooting where 4 or more people are shot, it's very unlikely there's going to be an accidental shooting unless you have a Glock switch and you drop it and it just shoots 4 people. So that's one that's not going to be used at all in this database that we look at today. Rampage shooting is just what I explained to you, domestic and confrontation. Okay, so if we take this very first one, as you can see, I took the liberty of already classifying it as a confrontation shooting. Let's open this up and see it. Los Angeles, 2 people were shot to death and 8 others were wounded Monday morning at a commercial building in downtown Los Angeles. The shooting occurred at 12:53 a.m., according to a desk officer at the Los Angeles Police Department. Friends, although not acceptable, this was a New Year's Eve party that went south. There were people that got into a fight, got drunk, I'm sure, and decided to shoot at each other. This will not strike fear in the hearts of most Americans. Why? Because most of us, at least me, was sleeping at 12:53 a.m. on the January 1st. I was not out at a party. I was not at a block party. I was not getting drunk and partying down. If you were doing that, fine, as long as you weren't shooting or getting shot. The point here is that most of America was sound asleep in bed or maybe cleaning up the fireworks mess in their front yard. Not out at a party where people are going to meet up who have a beef with one another and decide to start shooting at each other. This was a confrontation shooting. This was not a mass shooting. This was not, again, by their numbers, it's classified as a mass shooting because they created their own numbers. They created this, right? They redefined what they call a mass shooting on their own. I could redefine it too and say 0 people, right? It's just a different category altogether as far as how you come to that number. So just because they call it that does not make that. This is a confrontation shooting. This is not something that will happen to 99.99% of Americans out there. I scrolled through the list and eventually I did find an actual, quote, mass shooting. If you notice what I have in red, if they're in blue, they're not a, quote, rampage shooting or a domestic shooting. You'll notice red, I have an R for rampage, and up above it, we'll get to that one in a second, I have the D, it's yellow, and that's a domestic shooting. So look here at you'll remember this one, Perry, Iowa. This is where the person went into the school, a former student went into the school in Iowa and shot the 11-year-old, killing him, and shot a couple of other people. But the 11-year-old, and I think the principal ended up dying, but the 11-year-old was pronounced dead on the scene. That's an accurate one. That is one that does strike fear in the hearts of Americans, because we send our kids to school. Some people work at these schools. This is random. This cannot be predicted. This was not a specific person that this person was shooting at. He wanted a body count. That's what he was looking for. In fact, he ended up shooting himself. That's another indicator that usually the type of shooting that it is. Most of these actual rampage killings with a sociopath involved, they either go down in a hail of gunfire or they kill themselves. It's very common. Usually these other types of shootings, other than domestic will usually have the shooter will shoot himself if he doesn't go down in a hail of gunfire. But in these confrontational shootings, how many times have you read one of these shootings and said, suspect is still on the loose? They don't ever catch them. They're not really looking for them because they understand there is no threat to the general public outside of this small group of people that are shooting at one another. If you had this type of school shooting and this person would have left the school, there would be a manhunt for them, right? Because this person is a sociopath and a true rampage killer. He's looking to indiscriminately and randomly shoot people that he does not necessarily know. When there is a gang-related shooting or a confrontational shooting and that shooter leaves the scene where he shot somebody, he's not going to shoot somebody else. Although he is a threat, he's a threat to other gang members or people that they are going to rob or something like that. Not to the general public. This guy's not driving to a mall after he shoots somebody at 2 a.m. to indiscriminately shoot strangers. That's not what they do. Again, we're misclassifying these things and putting them all in the same bucket incorrectly, because we'll never solve it as long as they're all in the same bucket. How do you look for every single shooter and every single killer the exact same way when they're all different as how they arrive at why they pulled the trigger? The domestic shooting you see up there, 4 adults, child dead in shooting believed to be domestic violence related in Fort Bend County. You go down there and you look at this, and this is clearly somebody that either just flipped out, could be that they were over-medicated, could be that they were on drugs, could be that they were drunk. Either way, they flipped out and they murdered their entire family. Even if this is not the mom or the dad who did this, the fact that an entire family was killed, this is a direct hit type murder if it was not domestic. So again, this was not the kind of murder that the rest of the community needs to worry about. This person who pulled the trigger is not a threat to the general public unless that general public were trying to intervene in his shooting of his family members. This is not somebody looking to indiscriminately shoot strangers at the mall. Again, when this person shot his family members, he did not drive down to the mall and decide to start shooting strangers indiscriminately. Again, not a threat to the general public for the most part. So I went through all of these shootings that took place from the gun violence archive, and I came to the conclusion by reading every single one and classifying every single one to that column in the far right. You'll see that I have everything from a mob hit. This was a legitimate mob hit. It's definitely a targeted group of people who were targeted for whatever reason. And I say mob hit, it could have been, opposing gangs selling drugs or something like that, but it was a direct hit that they went after. And I've got total of, again, you saw the one actual rampage killing that gets people stirred up. You had 3 domestic killings, and you had 30 confrontation killings. The rampage killing is the one that most people are fearful of because they are so unpredictable and random. The domestic and the confrontation are ones that most people will never be a part of, right? It's just not a thing. And the confrontation is the one that draws in the most numbers. It's also the least talked about in the media or anywhere else. When these people cite these numbers, they never, ever talk about confrontations. They don't talk about fights breaking out. They don't talk about gang members. They steer clear of all of that. We know the things that they normally say, and we'll get into that in here a second. For January 2024, the types of mass shootings, if you break them down into actual accurate subcategories like I did, there was only one rampage shooting, there was 3 domestic shooting events, and 30 confrontation events, which included block parties, drive-bys, street takeovers where these people will get an intersection and just do wheelies and donuts and things like that in the street. One of those took place there. All these places that I just don't find myself. I would not have been at any of these locations for any of these 30 confrontation shootings during the month of January. To be fair, only 2.9 of these shootings in the month of January were rampage shootings, meaning that 97.1% of the shootings were not ones that most of us should worry about. 97% of the numbers they capture to try to get you fearful and scared of mass shootings, 97% of those numbers are bogus. In other words, they will not affect you if you're a normal, everyday, run-of-the-mill American just trying to live your life and do your thing. You will not be involved in 97% of what they classify here. 88.2% were confrontational killings. 8.8% were domestic. I want to remind everybody, this database, this inaccurate database, where they created their own category and the media ran with it just because it inflates numbers, this is what most of your traditional media out there is using right now to stoke fear. This is what all of these anti-gun groups are using also. I showed that earlier. Those are the experts, right? The quote experts. The White House invites people from these anti-gun groups to go sit with them and talk about gun violence. They go there bringing data from the gun violence archive. And they use that data to tell the White House what they need to do regarding guns. They're using inaccurate data. Their data is simply not accurate. You can classify it however you want. You can create your own little category and your own numbers and qualifications on how it fits into that. But if you're not using federal numbers like the FBI's numbers or an agreed upon set of numbers, why are we even keeping track of it? If everybody keeps their own set of numbers out there, then how do you ever trust one? The reason why so many of these mainstream media people out there trust the Gun Violence Archive is because they're the one that throws everything into the same bucket. They're looking at, I can guarantee you these people went across the internet and looked at all these other organizations who were collecting the same data. And the Gun Violence Archive had the highest number, so it sells the most ads. They didn't choose anybody else. They didn't cite anybody else. They didn't poke holes into this. Whenever they're talking about these, quote, mass shootings, they're not telling you that 98% of them, or what was our number? 88% of them are actually gang-related shootings or confrontational type shootings. They're not telling you that. They're making you think you could be the next victim when you're probably not, because 88% of these things will never affect you because you're never going to be there at that time either. Finally, CNN Health put out an article, Mass Shootings, How to Calm Anxiety and Fear in Yourself and Loved Ones. The reason why I pull this up is because this is another caveat to this whole story that we need to talk about. If you can create a problem that is not really a problem, and I'm not saying one person being killed is okay. What I'm saying is don't lie about the problem. There were not 34, quote, mass shootings in the month of January. So don't lie about it. Why are they lying about it? They're lying about it because there's dollars associated with it. Not only do these anti-gun groups get to fundraise off of gang members shooting at each other, it's a good thing for them, right? Good business. Just cite the number, not necessarily the person and the conditions and the circumstances, right? It's a good fundraising opportunity. But the federal government, the whatever they call the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act that passed, a lot of numbers earmarked in there for things associated with the community, sending money to the communities. I found it kind of funny that how to prepare people for dealing with a, quote, mass shooting. Those were numbers that were included as far as budget dollars. So the federal government is happy to use these inaccurate numbers with the Gun Violence Archive because they were able to take this to Congress because nobody's doing their job and nobody's actually looking at these numbers like we have. So they just take this and run with it and say, look, this is an epidemic. This is a problem. They're already probably running to Congress now saying we had 34 mass shootings in January. We need more money. Because that's ultimately what it is. They want more money. They want to throw money at their community. Whoever the congressman or senator is, I need this money for my community. If you're in a state where you have a big city like Louisiana, for instance, Baton Rouge and New Orleans, they're in these numbers for having mass shootings. However, there were no mass shootings in the state of Louisiana, technically speaking, at least from a rampage killing standpoint in the month of January. There was 2 or 3 listed in here in Baton Rouge and New Orleans. But we know what those were. They're drive-by shootings and things like that. Those are common occurrences here in the state of Louisiana. So a Louisiana congressman or senator can now say, I need this much money because, ooh, look how many mass shootings I had. You know, if Louisiana had 3 out of 34 in 1 month, sounds like a pretty big deal, right? Give me some money. And then they're going to use that money however they want and mishandle that money. Now, looking more at this CNN article, the first line of their article, remember their title was Mass Shootings, How to Calm Anxiety and Fear in Yourself and Your Loved Ones. First line, it seems like nearly every day Americans find ourselves processing another mass shooting. So clearly CNN is using the Gun Violence Archive. They don't cite that here. But using just January, there's 31 days in a month, we had 34, quote, mass shootings according to the Gun Violence Archive. So clearly CNN is using this same data. And we know we've read other articles where CNN has cited the Gun Violence Archive. So we know that's what they're referring to right here. So they're admitting that based on the numbers, daily we have these types of occurrences. In this same article, a clinical psychologist, Alexandra Solomon, a clinical assistant professor at Northwestern University and host of the Reimagining Love podcast, decided to make this about race. Now, I didn't make this about race. She did. Again, same article. I want to go back to this. Same article that said, it seems like nearly every day Americans find ourselves processing another mass shooting. Further down the article, I want parents in white families to be intentional about talking about many of these white supremacist shootings versus mass shootings. Parents of young white males especially need to be monitoring online activity. We know that groups are targeting young white guys for radicalization. If they're using the Gun Violence Archive for their data set to talk about a shooting a day, a mass shooting every single day, and then they make the jump to say that white people are the problem, you know who's not clicking on these incidents on the Gun Violence Archive's website? Obviously, Miss Lady over here from Northwestern wherever university. Clearly, she has not looked at any of these. If they're stating that we're having these daily and this woman wants to blame this on white parents and white males, that's not what's happening. The numbers literally prove that this is not the problem. Yet this is where the White House goes. That's their go-to also, to blame a white person. Why do they redirect from these areas that are having these 30, quote, mass shootings like we've seen in the month of January? Why do they redirect? What is their reasoning for redirecting and blatantly lying about who's pulling the trigger in all of these incidences? Friends, don't buy it. The media has zero credibility to anybody right now. Do not trust the media. I will get some blowback for this, but I'm going to tell you, the media is the enemy. The mainstream media is 100%, without a doubt, the enemy. If you turn the TV on and anybody is on there and they consider themselves news, ignore them. Because they are lying to you, they have a political axe to grind, and they have an interest somewhere. And they have realized, especially in the mainstream media, because it is a dying form of media. They have realized that people are going elsewhere to consume their news. So unless they can sensationalize it and make it more bloody and worse off and more fearful and scare you into coming back to get scared again tomorrow, they're useless. So this is the last hope for them. They're hanging on by a thread, and this is the way they do it, by lying to you and keeping you in a tizzy and in a fit because you're afraid that one of these 34 mass shootings is going to come to your door, when in fact there was really only one that you should have worried about in the month of January.
God save the Queen, man.
I'm sorry, I thought this was America. He's over.